He dumped his pregnant wife for a younger mistress now. She's a millionaire without him. Meet Natalie Whittaker, a woman whose heart once brimmed with unwavering devotion for the man she believed would stand beside her through every obstacle. Little did she know, her husband, Richard, harbored a secret desire for new thrills, a yearning that would ultimately drive him to abandon their marriage and their unborn child. What unfolds next is a tale of heartbreak, betrayal, and the extraordinary path that turned Natalie into a self-made millionaire. Now, with her success echoing from conference rooms to charity galas, she's the one calling the shots. Strap in for twists, turns, and a dose of karma you won't soon forget. Natalie Whittaker first noticed something was off when Richard started coming home late from his managerial job at Tennyson Real Estate. Richard had once been punctual to the point of obsession. He believed timeliness was the hallmark of a man with a plan. Then, without warning, he began working overtime. Initially, Natalie chalked it up to professional ambition. After all, they shared dreams of a comfortable home in the suburbs, perhaps starting a business together, and raising their soon-to-be child in a stable environment. She was 3 months pregnant, glowing with excitement and maternal anticipation. But the late nights grew more frequent. Richard's phone seemed glued to his hand, and he guarded it like a treasure chest of secrets. Whispers that once accompanied romantic confessions turned into curt one-liners. Natalie tried to reason with herself. Maybe the stress of an upcoming child was weighing on him. Maybe he felt the crush of financial responsibility. She tried to assuage her mounting suspicion with the logic of love that perseveres, love that forgives, love that endures life's storms. So she convinced herself that what truly mattered was the life within her, a growing spark of hope. Despite the hormonal fluctuations, the morning sickness, and the swirl of anxiety, she maintained a bright smile whenever he walked in the door. She still prepared him dinner, though the dinners often sat untouched because he claimed to have eaten at the office. She still tidied the living room, anticipating the moment he'd collapse on the couch and cuddle up with her to watch their favorite shows. But that moment never came. He was either too tired or claimed to have more work to do. One rainy evening, as thunder rattled the windows of their modest condo, Natalie was startled by the sound of the front door slamming. Richard, dripping from the storm, stood in the foyer glaring at her as though she'd committed some grave offense. Before she could greet him with her usual warmth, he threw down his soggy briefcase and muttered, "We need to talk." The tone sent a chill through her. Her heart pounded, because in those 4 words, spoken with cold finality, she sensed the unraveling of everything they had built together. Richard demanded that they separate. He spewed a list of reasons he wasn't happy. They'd grown apart. He wasn't ready for fatherhood. He needed freedom. The words assaulted Natalie in quick, cruel bursts, each one slicing her like the shards of a broken mirror. Her pleas and tears did nothing to soften him. It was as though he had steeled himself for this moment, forging a resolve that brooked no argument. He simply repeated, "This isn't working. I'm sorry." The desperation in Natalie's voice escalated. "We have a child on the way," she sobbed. "How can you do this now?" Richard's face registered a flicker of pain, but it vanished before she could fully recognize it. He replied with something she never expected to hear, "I know this is terrible timing, but I can't live a lie." She felt her world collapse. Every memory, the spontaneous road trips, the shared coffee runs at Starbucks on chilly mornings, the vows they exchanged in front of friends and family, now seemed meaningless. He was gone, and he was taking with him the naive innocence she once had about love and commitment. What Natalie didn't know at that moment was that this was only the tip of the iceberg. While she battled an avalanche of emotions, Richard had already orchestrated his exit strategy. He'd rented a pricey apartment across town, one far beyond what they could afford under normal circumstances. More shocking yet, he already had someone waiting there for him, a woman named Isabel, a bright-eyed 20-something who basked in the glow of Richard's attention and entertained him with her impulsive flirtations. And so began Natalie's harrowing journey, abandoned, pregnant, and desperate for answers. Yet a spark of strength lay hidden in her soul, waiting for the right moment to ignite. One day, that spark would become a blaze, and not even Richard's betrayal or Isabel's allure could extinguish it. The day after Richard left, Natalie awoke in a haze, her face stained with the dried tracks of tears. She stared at the empty side of the bed where he once slept, where his presence had been a comfort, a promise of unending love. Now that space felt like a gaping abyss, a testament to his abrupt departure. Her phone buzzed incessantly, messages from worried friends, missed calls from her mother. She knew she had to face them eventually to say, "Yes, it's over. Richard left." The prospect of uttering those words made her stomach churn. She kept turning the phone over in her hands, trying to summon the courage to open her messages. Even the simplest text, "Are you okay?" felt like a trap. She wasn't okay, and she had no explanation to offer beyond betrayal and heartbreak. By mid-afternoon, she braved the shower, letting hot water pummel her tense shoulders. The steam might have eased her physical aches, but it did nothing for her soul. She pressed her hand against her lower abdomen, thinking about the child growing within her. That child was now the only reason she could find to get out of bed, to eat, to face the day. The baby represented hope, a possibility that her future didn't end because Richard had chosen someone else. Determined not to let her emotions paralyze her, Natalie pulled on a comfortable sweater and leggings, then ventured out to the local grocery store. She needed essentials. The baby needed prenatal vitamins, healthy foods, and a stable environment. As she picked up fresh fruits and leafy greens, her gaze drifted to couples strolling by, a husband holding his pregnant wife's hand, a pair of newlyweds giggling over dessert choices. Her chest constricted at the stark reminder of everything she had lost. At the checkout line, she was greeted by a former neighbor from her old apartment building, Miss S. Turner, who was known for her unstoppable curiosity. "Natalie, dear, how is that handsome husband of yours?" The older woman chirped. The question stabbed Natalie in the heart, but she forced herself to smile politely. "He's not living with me anymore," she managed to say. Miss S. Turner's face crinkled with concern and confusion. "Oh dear, I'm sorry to hear that. You poor thing. Do you need any help?" Natalie shook her head, politely declining. The exchange felt both humiliating and surreal. On her way home, she passed by the Starbucks, where she and Richard used to grab lattes every Friday morning. A memory slammed into her, the first time they'd ventured there as a couple. He had teased her about her complicated order, a grand soy latte with extra foam, and she had teased him about his black coffee with 3 sugar packets. She could almost hear his laughter again, feel his arm around her waist as they stood waiting for their drinks. Now, the shop sign felt like a mocking ghost of the happiness she once knew. That evening, after unloading her groceries, Natalie sat on the living room couch, the silence thicker than any she'd known. She opened her phone at last and responded to her mother with a simple text. "Richard left. I don't know what to do, but I'm trying to cope. I love you, Mum." Moments later, her phone rang. It was her mother, frantically asking questions, voice trembling with concern. Natalie's resolve to keep it together broke. She wept openly, recounting the confrontation with Richard, the callousness of his departure, her confusion about the future. Her mother offered to fly in to support her. "No, Mum, I need to handle this on my own," she insisted. "I'll let you know if it gets too overwhelming." When she ended the call, there was a glimmer of pride within her tears. She realized something monumental. Her independence had always been there, beneath the layers of wife, partner, caretaker. She loved Richard, but she wasn't helpless without him. That night, she forced herself to write down the first steps toward her new reality. 1. Hire a lawyer, someone who could help navigate the separation and safeguard her and her unborn child's rights. 2. Schedule an appointment with her OB-GYN to make sure stress wasn't harming her pregnancy. 3. Look into part-time income or remote jobs. Richard might have been the primary breadwinner, but she was determined to stand on her own 2 feet. As she wrote, a tear slid down her cheek, but her hand remained steady. She was anchored by a fierce maternal instinct, a protective drive she never knew she possessed. Even if her world had been shattered, she was determined to rebuild brick by brick, day by day. The next day, under a grey sky that matched her mood, Natalie trudged into a lawyer's office. She had never even contemplated needing a divorce attorney. Her vision of marriage involved growing old together and celebrating each other's achievements. Yet here she was, a cardboard folder of personal documents clutched in her hands, feeling simultaneously anxious and resolute. Cynthia Morrison, a friend of a friend recommended by her mother, welcomed Natalie into her office with warm professionalism. After offering her a seat, Cynthia explained the process of legal separation and the steps they'd need to take to ensure child support. The conversation was practical, but each step felt like swallowing shards of glass. Filing for divorce, requesting spousal support, negotiating custody, these were words she never thought she'd associate with her own life. Yet hearing them from Cynthia gave her a sense of control. At least now she had a map, even if the terrain looked daunting. Later that evening, as Natalie scrolled through her social media, feed a mindless habit she'd acquired to distract herself, she stumbled upon a photograph that jolted her entire body. It was Richard, beaming alongside Isabel. She appeared younger, carefree, clad in a trendy outfit that suggested indulgence in luxury stores. The pair stood outside a French bistro downtown, arms wrapped around each other. The caption read, "With my love, enjoying a new chapter, #blessed, #new beginnings." Natalie felt as though the air had been knocked from her lungs. The brazen display of affection, of a new life, left no room for the illusions she had clung to. Any hope that this was a temporary lapse in Richard's judgment evaporated in the face of that photograph. Not only had he left her while she was pregnant, he was proudly flaunting his new relationship as though he'd finally been released from some prison. Her initial reaction was to throw her phone across the room, but then anger took hold. How dare he celebrate while she carried his child alone, struggling to piece together her life? How dare he trivialize the vows they shared? Tears of fury welled up in her eyes. But in the depths of that anger, a new resolve was born. She realized something crucial. She could either remain the wounded, discarded ex-wife, or she could transform her pain into a catalyst for something greater. That realization didn't come gently. It was fueled by heartbreak, righteous indignation, and a will to protect her unborn child. But it crystallized in her mind. She had to build a new life, and that life needed to be one she was proud of. Let Richard have his shallow escapades. Let him indulge in illusions of youth and excitement. Natalie had real responsibilities and real dreams to fulfill. Taking a deep breath, she picked up her phone from the floor. She responded to a text from Cynthia, confirming she was ready to proceed with the paperwork. Then she opened an email from her former college roommate, Aisha, who now ran a small design firm. The subject line read, "Possible opportunity?" Intrigued, Natalie clicked it open. Aisha wrote that she had just landed a major contract with a local non-profit organization aiming to revamp their entire marketing platform. They needed someone adept at project management and administrative tasks, someone reliable. Could Natalie be interested in coming on board, at least on a part-time basis? Natalie stared at the email, She had experience as an administrative coordinator before she married Richard, but she'd given it up when she moved to his city. The prospect of working again excited her, though fear nibbled at her thoughts. Could she handle this responsibility while navigating a pregnancy and emotional turmoil? But then she remembered her vow to shape a life she could be proud of. She typed a reply without hesitation. "I'm interested. Let's talk details." Weeks passed in a blur of appointments, phone calls, and emotional ups and downs. Natalie formally filed for divorce, taking the first step in unraveling the legal knots that bound her to Richard. She simultaneously delved into her new job with Aisha's design firm. Part of her questioned whether she could juggle it all, but each day she discovered fresh reserves of strength. Her mornings began with journaling, a habit she picked up during her therapy sessions. Dr. Alvarez, her therapist, suggested she use the journal to process her grief, rage, and hopes. At first, Natalie wrote timidly, as though afraid her emotions would come alive and overwhelm her. But soon, she found herself pouring her heart onto the pages, venting every thought that swirled in her head. This practice became her lifeline, a way to navigate the chaos of her life. Aisha's firm thrived on creativity. Though Natalie's role was administrative, she often found herself peeking into the brainstorming sessions, absorbing the excitement of new campaigns. Before long, Aisha noticed Natalie's keen eye for design and marketing possibilities. She encouraged Natalie to contribute ideas, eventually giving her a chance to manage smaller projects. With each successful task, Natalie's confidence grew. It was like waking up from a nightmare and realizing daylight still existed. One evening, after an exhausting but fulfilling day, she returned home to find an envelope slipped under her door. Inside was a handwritten note from Richard. The words on the page were contradictory, laced with guilt and defiance. He wrote that he was sorry for the timing, but also insisted she accept the reality that they had grown apart. He rationalized his relationship with Isabel as something that just happened and asked for an amicable resolution to their divorce. Natalie read it twice, tears sliding down her cheeks. In a strange way, the note offered closure. It confirmed that Richard's betrayal wasn't a momentary lapse, but a conscious decision. He was done, and so was she. Rather than respond with anger, she tucked the note away. She had more pressing matters, like her next ultrasound appointment. At the doctor's office, an ultrasound technician guided the transducer over her belly, and the screen came alive with the form of a tiny baby. The technician pointed out the developing hands, the heartbeat flickering like a small, determined light. Emotion overwhelmed her, but this time it wasn't just sadness. It was awe, wonder, and a fierce, protective love. She recorded the heartbeat and stored the ultrasound images in her phone. One day, her child would see that from the moment Natalie learned about her pregnancy, she fought every day to bring them a stable, loving world. On her way out, she decided to indulge in a warm drink at Starbucks. It was an emotional test, walking into the place she had always associated with Richard, but she realized that her memories didn't belong to him alone. They were a part of her life too, and she had the right to create new memories here. As she sat down with her latte, laptop open, she reviewed a marketing pitch she planned to deliver to Aisha the next morning. She felt the baby kick for the first time, a delicate flutter that nearly made her gasp out loud. A smile crept across her lips. In that moment, she felt the intangible shift, a sense that her life was not defined by Richard's abandonment, but by her choices. She was forging her own path, fueled by the love she had for her unborn child and the love she was learning to have for herself. While Natalie was diligently rebuilding her life, Richard and Isabel basked in their honeymoon phase. They moved into a luxurious high-rise apartment downtown, complete with a rooftop pool and a view that overlooked the city skyline. Isabel posted pictures on social media, each snapshot capturing exotic dinners, spontaneous getaways, and shiny gifts that Richard lavished upon her. Their captions read like taunts: living our best life, chasing dreams, power couple. It seemed, on the surface, that they were enthralled by each other's company. Behind the glitz, however, cracks were forming. Richard's job was demanding, especially now that he was paying for a penthouse he could barely afford. He was also receiving letters from Cynthia Morrison, Natalie's attorney, warning him about overdue spousal support payments. Whenever those letters arrived, Isabel would roll her eyes. "Can't you just handle this?" she would say, feigning disinterest. She liked the idea of being with a successful older man, but she didn't want to be burdened by the baggage of his previous marriage and pending child. Desperate to maintain Isabel's interest and keep up appearances, Richard worked longer hours, pushing for bigger sales at Tennyson Real Estate. The stress mounted, but he pressed on, convinced that he could provide Isabel with the lifestyle she seemed to crave. At the same time, he ignored Cynthia's repeated notices, convinced that he could somehow negotiate a minimal payout. After all, he rationalized, Natalie was capable of supporting herself. She had a new job, didn't she? However, those illusions of control began to slip when he discovered how determined Natalie truly was. The details of her legal demands were unyielding and entirely justified: child support, a fair share of their marital assets, and coverage for prenatal and postnatal health care. Richard grumbled to his own lawyer, complaining that Natalie was being unreasonable. His lawyer, a dispassionate man named Larson, disagreed. "She's entitled to these terms, especially considering your child's well-being," Larson said. "We can attempt negotiation, but the courts favor the mother, particularly in a case like this." That night, Richard returned home to find Isabel sprawled across the white leather couch, scrolling through her phone, a bored expression on her face. She didn't even look up when he entered. "Hey," she murmured, "did you close that big sale you mentioned? We need to book flights to Cabo next month." A flicker of annoyance crossed Richard's face. "I'm working on it," he said through clenched teeth. He tossed his keys onto a table strewn with designer shopping bags. The apartment was cluttered with items. Isabel had recently purchased a pair of brand-name heels, a Givenchy perfume set, and expensive decor pieces. Each new acquisition chipped away at the savings he once had, but he couldn't bear to voice his concerns. He was convinced that if he just held on a bit longer, a large commission would solve everything. Yet as he stood amidst all these tokens of luxury, pangs of regret gnawed at him. He thought of Natalie, the woman he once pledged to love forever. She had never demanded extravagance. She found joy in small things: a simple picnic, a weekend trip to the countryside, a heartfelt letter. Now, the only messages he received from her were reminders about legal obligations he had tried to avoid. Late into the night, Richard lay awake, staring at the ceiling. Isabel slept soundly beside him, oblivious to the turmoil swirling in his mind. A part of him whispered that his life had spiraled out of control, that he had made a grave mistake leaving Natalie. But he shoved that thought aside, convincing himself that if he could just secure the next big real estate deal, everything would be fine. This was merely a phase, a rough patch. His grander ambitions would triumph, and he would prove to everyone, especially Natalie, that he wasn't the villain she might believe him to be. Unbeknownst to Richard, the woman he left behind was no longer the passive, pleading wife he remembered. She was forging a new identity day by day, one filled with purpose, strength, and budding success. And soon, fate would place them both on a collision course that neither could have anticipated. For Natalie, life's turning points often arrived in subtle disguises. One such moment occurred on a chilly fall afternoon when Aisha invited her to a meeting at a local non-profit headquarters. The building housed a remarkable organization called Kids Path, which provided educational resources and mentorship programs for underprivileged youth. They were desperate for a new digital presence, a complete overhaul of their website, social media campaigns, and promotional strategies. As Natalie listened to the non-profit's director, a spark illuminated her eyes. Their mission resonated deeply. She had always cherished the idea of empowering children, giving them opportunities to succeed regardless of their socio-economic backgrounds. That synergy of personal passion and professional skill ignited a fire in her. She carefully took notes, asked pointed questions about their target audience and budget constraints, and proposed an outline for a phased project plan. By the end of the meeting, the director was visibly impressed. "You've got a sharp mind for strategy," she told Natalie. "We'd be thrilled to work with you on this." Aisha beamed, proud of her friend's newfound confidence. But she also recognized that Natalie might be capable of more than just project management under someone else's umbrella. Later that evening, after everyone had left the firm, Aisha pulled Natalie aside. "Do you ever think about starting your own consulting company?" she asked. Natalie's eyes widened. "My own company? That's a huge leap, Aisha. I'm barely holding it together as is." Aisha smiled sympathetically, gesturing to the visible baby bump. "I know you've got a lot going on, but your potential is undeniable. I see how you light up in these meetings. You're not just following instructions, you're leading. Maybe not now, maybe after the baby is born, but keep it in mind." That night, Natalie lay awake, pondering Aisha's words. The idea of running her own business intrigued her. She imagined a small consultancy specializing in marketing and branding for non-profits and socially conscious startups organizations that truly aim to make a difference. The notion of combining her professional expertise with a desire to do good in the world made her heart soar. Yet reality intruded. She was 7 months pregnant, grappling with a divorce, and strapped for cash, even with her part-time work. Where would she find the capital, the time, or the emotional energy to start a company from scratch? But the dream refused to die. She began devoting her spare moments to researching small business grants, crafting a provisional business plan, and brainstorming a name. That was how Ascendant Vision Consulting was born, initially just a name scribbled in her journal, but soon morphing into a tangible plan with mission statements, service offerings, and a skeletal website. With renewed vigor, Natalie tackled the Kids Path project. It became a prototype for her future ambitions, a testament to what she could achieve if she poured her passion and expertise into something she believed in. The project flourished. The non-profit's website traffic skyrocketed, donations doubled, and partnerships formed with local schools. Word of mouth spread quickly in the non-profit community, leading to more inquiries about the marketing firm behind Kids Path's transformation. Meanwhile, Cynthia continued to navigate the legal labyrinth of the divorce. Richard remained evasive, often missing deadlines for financial disclosures. But each missed deadline only strengthened Natalie's case. The court was unsympathetic to Richard's delays. Eventually, Cynthia informed Natalie that she might be entitled to a significant settlement and monthly child support once the baby arrived. Every so often, in the quiet hours of the night, Natalie's mind drifted to Richard. She wondered how he was coping, whether he felt even a twinge of regret for abandoning her. But each time, she reminded herself that she had a new path to follow, one that required all her focus. She refused to be shackled by the past. While Natalie found her stride in new endeavors, Richard's carefully constructed illusions were crumbling. His high-pressure job at Tennyson Real Estate saw cyclical fluctuations. When sales dipped, commission checks shrank. The strain of financing an extravagant lifestyle with Isabel bore down on him. Credit card bills multiplied, with interest piling higher each month. In the midst of it all, Isabel's fondness for shopping sprees and upscale getaways never wavered. One evening, Richard returned home, exhausted from a fruitless day of showings. Isabel was sprawled on the couch, phone in hand, complaining that her friends were all traveling to Bali this season, and she felt left out. She demanded that Richard plan a similar trip for them soon. Guilt and frustration warred within him. He didn't want to disappoint Isabel. He feared losing the only semblance of excitement and affection he had left. So he dug deeper into his dwindling savings, promising they'd jet off to Bali the following month. It felt like a sickening replay of the scenario he'd once avoided with Natalie. Back then, his ambition had always been to ensure security, not frivolity. With Isabel, he found himself trapped by her expectations of instant gratification. But in weak moments, Richard told himself that perhaps he deserved this. He had chosen youth and excitement over commitment and loyalty. Now, he was paying the price, and the price was steep. His dissatisfaction peaked one chilly evening when he took Isabel to a trendy rooftop lounge. The city lights glittered below, the music pulsed with an electrifying beat, and wealthy patrons mingled. Isabel sipped her cocktail and engaged in flirtatious banter with a group of stockbrokers at the adjacent table, ignoring Richard completely. He felt invisible, a mere wallet with a pulse. The pang of jealousy and regret in his gut became too big to ignore. He excused himself to the restroom, staring at his reflection in the mirror. Who had he become? It struck him how lonely he felt, even in the presence of the woman he claimed to leave Natalie for. At least with Natalie, he never questioned his sense of belonging or self-worth. The mirror offered no comfort, only a reflection of a man tangled in mistakes. He returned to the table, feigning a smile. Isabel barely noticed. She was too busy showing off her new designer handbag to the stockbrokers. That night, while Isabel slept, he scrolled through social media out of habit and noticed something curious: references to a marketing success at Kids Path, a non-profit. Tucked within the congratulatory posts was a snippet of praise for Ascendant Vision Consulting, headed by the incredibly talented Natalie Whitaker. The words jolted him. He recognized that name. He knew that ambition, that flair for organization. His ex-wife was forging a path, one that apparently involved launching her own consultancy. A swirl of conflicting emotions gripped him. Pride, perhaps. Jealousy? Most definitely. Guilt? Overwhelmingly. He thought about messaging her, something along the lines of "Congratulations" or "I'm glad you're doing well." But an invisible barrier prevented him. How could he congratulate the woman he left when he was the one who initially doubted her potential? Instead, he shut his phone off and tried to sleep. The city lights danced across the ceiling, reminding him that not all that glitters is gold. Natalie's final trimester brought with it physical discomfort, sore feet, difficulty sleeping, bouts of heartburn, but also an electrifying sense of anticipation. The closer she got to her due date, the more she focused on building a stable world for her child. She had managed to save a modest amount from her part-time work, and as Ascendant Vision Consulting garnered more interest, she began planning for an official launch once the baby was a few months old. Every day, she felt the baby move, a reassuring sign that life went on inside her, despite the storms swirling outside. She transformed a spare bedroom into a makeshift nursery with soothing colors and a second-hand crib she found in excellent condition. One evening, she hung a mobile above the crib, delicate stars and moon shapes that sparkled when they caught the light. A tear of gratitude slipped down her cheek. She couldn't wait to meet the little soul who had already given her life new purpose. In the final month of her pregnancy, she received a surprising phone call from Tennyson Real Estate's legal department. They wanted to confirm certain aspects of her separation from Richard, possibly in anticipation of some internal policy changes. The conversation was brief, but it left her with a jolt of curiosity. Why would Richard's company care about her status? It wasn't long before she discovered the reason. News broke that Tennyson Real Estate was restructuring, cutting costs, and consolidating roles. Richard's position was deemed redundant, and he was on the verge of losing his job unless he could prove he was indispensable. Natalie felt a pang of sadness. Regardless of what he had done, he was still the father of her child, but the sadness was tempered by the knowledge that this was the life he chose. He had gambled everything for a fleeting thrill, leaving her to struggle alone. Now the consequences were catching up to him. In a rare moment of weakness, she contemplated calling him, offering some comfort or advice. But she quickly dismissed the idea. They were no longer partners in life. His choices were his own, and so were hers. Her priority now was her child, her new career, and her emotional well-being. As her due date approached, Natalie went through the final legal steps to secure her divorce settlement. Cynthia informed her that the courts ruled in her favor for a fair share of the marital assets and mandated child support. In theory, it was a victory, but the lingering question loomed: would Richard even have the means to pay if he lost his job? Natalie's water broke 2 weeks early. Alone in her apartment, she felt a surge of panic, but managed to remain composed enough to dial 911. Soon, she was en route to St. Joseph's Hospital, heart pounding with adrenaline and worry. She had planned a more methodical approach to labor an overnight hospital bag, a steady drive to the maternity ward, perhaps a calming playlist. Instead, she found herself in the back of an ambulance, breathing through contractions. Her mother arrived at the hospital within hours, anxiety etched into her features. She fussed over Natalie, offering words of encouragement and wiping the sweat from her forehead. As the contractions intensified, Natalie clung to her mother's hand, tears mixing with sweat. "I can't do this," she whimpered at one point, but her mother, eyes brimming with empathy, whispered, "You already are, sweetheart. You're stronger than you know." After an agonizing labor, Natalie welcomed a tiny baby girl into the world. The moment the infant was placed on her chest, everything else receded: Richard's betrayal, the financial uncertainty, her worries about the future. None of that mattered in the face of the new life staring up at her with wide, curious eyes. She named her daughter Maya. In the days that followed, Natalie felt as though she were learning an entirely new language: diapers, midnight feedings, quiet lullabies in the small hours of the morning. Each time Maya cried, Natalie's heart clenched, but she discovered reservoirs of patience and love she never knew she possessed. Exhausted but joyful, she often simply watched Maya sleep, marveling at the miracle of her existence. Richard didn't visit. Part of her had expected that. He sent a text, a curt hope, "Everything went well, congrats." She didn't bother responding. She was busy savoring the magic of these first moments with Maya and adjusting to a world in which she was the sole provider of comfort and security for this tiny human. Nevertheless, the specter of financial realities still hovered. Hospital bills were steep, even with insurance. Although the court mandated that Richard share the burden, Natalie knew that enforcement could be a battle. For now, she felt compelled to focus on her recovery and her baby. Thoughts of pursuing back payments or legal threats would come later. One Sunday evening, as she gazed at Maya sleeping soundly in the crib, Natalie felt a surge of motivation. In that moment, she vowed to give her daughter a life filled with love, opportunity, and security. She vowed to show her daughter that even when you've been cast aside, your worth lies in your own hands. She vowed to stand as an example of resilience and ambition, because love, once shattered, can be rebuilt in unimaginable ways. 3 months passed in a whirlwind of late-night feedings, dirty diapers, and stolen naps. It was chaotic yet rewarding, and amidst it all, Natalie found pockets of time to refine her business plan for Ascendant Vision Consulting. The success of the Kids Path campaign had sparked interest among other nonprofits, and offers for freelance work trickled in even as she was nursing Maya. Determined to seize this momentum, Natalie registered Ascendant Vision Consulting as an official business. She used her modest savings to build a professional website, design a logo, and rent a small co-working space that she could use a few times a week. With Maya carefully tucked in a baby carrier or watched by a trusted neighbor, Natalie spent hours on conference calls and client meetings. Her passion for aiding meaningful organizations shone through, and her personal story of perseverance quietly inspired those she worked with. Cynthia, seeing Natalie's resilience, urged her to pursue the financial support mandated by the court. Richard, however, had become elusive. Rumors circulated that he was let go from Tennyson Real Estate after a failed attempt to salvage a major account. Word on the grapevine suggested he was scrambling for freelance gigs, his polished lifestyle slipping through his fingers. Isabel's social media posts had turned bitter, filled with subtweets about broken promises and needing real men who can provide. The relationship was on rocky ground. Natalie felt a twinge of pity for him, but mostly she felt relief that she no longer bore any responsibility for his choices. She had her own battles to fight, raising Maya and elevating Ascendant Vision from a local curiosity to a reputable consulting firm. And fight she did. Her business acumen soared through trial and error. She spent sleepless nights studying marketing trends, devouring books on entrepreneurship, and perfecting her client pitches. Aisha continued to offer support from her own design firm, occasionally collaborating on joint projects that showcased both their strengths. Together, they delivered stunning campaigns for clients in education, community outreach, and environmental sustainability. Slowly but surely, Ascendant Vision became profitable. Clients shared testimonials praising Natalie's work ethic, her ability to empathize with organizational values, and her knack for delivering outstanding results within tight budgets. Before she knew it, she was speaking at local entrepreneur meetups, sharing her story of personal reinvention. Each time she mentioned her journey, pregnancy, heartbreak, and forging a new life, audiences were riveted. After her talks, people queued to hand her business cards, propose partnerships, or simply express their admiration. Life was still hectic. Maya's presence meant that any semblance of a rigid schedule was impossible, but Natalie learned to adapt. Some days, she conducted business calls while bouncing Maya on her knee. Other days, she typed proposals at 3 a.m. after Maya finally fell asleep. Yet through the exhaustion, a sense of purpose fueled her. She was building a future for herself and for her daughter. Amid the flurry of new contracts, speaking engagements, and media buzz around Ascendant Vision, Natalie received an email that nearly made her heart skip a beat. It was from Tennyson Cares, an offshoot philanthropic program started by Tennyson Real Estate. They were hosting a charity gala to fund scholarships for young adults pursuing careers in sustainable housing. The email extended an invitation for Ascendant Vision Consulting to participate as a partner, helping to bolster their marketing strategy. The invitation was surreal. Tennyson Real Estate was the very company that once employed Richard, the company indirectly linked to her tumultuous past. She wondered if the invitation was merely an automated outreach to various agencies, or if someone there specifically requested her firm. Either way, it felt like a full circle moment. Though trepidation fluttered in her stomach, she refused to let personal history derail potential growth. Ascendant Vision was bigger than her past with Richard, and the philanthropic nature of the gala aligned well with her company's mission. She accepted the invitation, meticulously preparing a presentation that showcased how Ascendant Vision could amplify the reach and impact of the scholarship fund. On the day of the meeting, she wore a modest but professional suit, her hair neatly pulled back. A wave of nerves threatened to overtake her as she stepped into Tennyson's gleaming skyscraper, but she reminded herself that she was there on behalf of her business, her future, and her daughter. Inside a spacious conference room, she was greeted by a team of Tennyson executives and PR managers. The meeting commenced smoothly. Natalie delivered her presentation with poise, illustrating the actionable steps they could take to connect with potential donors, highlight success stories, and create engaging content. She referenced her previous success stories, using data and anecdotes to prove Ascendant Vision's credibility. Midway through her presentation, the door opened, and in walked Richard. He looked a shadow of his former self, thinner, dark circles under his eyes, the confident swagger gone. She paused, her voice catching for a split second. He froze at the sight of her. The room went silent. Trying not to let her composure slip, Natalie continued, but she could feel Richard's gaze drilling into her. When she finished, the room erupted in applause. The Tennyson executives were visibly impressed. One of them stood to shake her hand. "That was brilliant," he exclaimed. "We'd love to have Ascendant Vision on board for this project." Natalie graciously accepted, ignoring the fact that Richard was lingering near the back, waiting for everyone to disperse. Once the meeting concluded, the executives filtered out, leaving the two of them alone for the first time since he'd walked out on her. The tension was palpable. He opened his mouth to speak, his voice shaking. "Natalie, She cut him off gently, not out of malice, but because she felt no need to hear his explanations or apologies anymore. "I'm glad you're well, Richard. Let's keep this professional." Her tone was calm but resolute. His eyes darted to her left hand, noticing the absence of a wedding ring. "I heard about your success, about the baby," he said softly, almost wistfully. She nodded, offering no details. She owed him none. Moments later, she collected her notes and excused herself. As she walked out of the conference room, she felt a swell of pride. She wasn't that timid, broken woman begging for him to stay. She was a force and entrepreneur, a mother, a woman steering her own destiny. If Richard had glimpsed any regret in her eyes, it was overshadowed by the radiance of her accomplishment. After that unexpected reunion, Richard found himself haunted by what might have been. He'd lost Isabel. She walked out on him a few months earlier, frustrated that his finances were crumbling and that he couldn't maintain the lavish lifestyle she craved. He was now surviving on sporadic freelance real estate consulting gigs, but his debts kept piling up. The tension of living beyond his means had finally snapped. Seeing Natalie prosper, especially in the very building where he once thrived, rattled him. He had always assumed she would remain the same woman he walked away from, fragile, pleading, overshadowed by the responsibilities of single motherhood. The woman who commanded that conference room bore no resemblance to the broken wife he'd left behind. It forced him to confront the magnitude of his mistakes. Desperate for stability, he approached Tennyson's philanthropic division for a position, hoping they'd remember his past accomplishments. They allowed him to handle administrative tasks on a trial basis. That was how he ended up in that conference room, witnessing Natalie's triumph firsthand. The contrast between their trajectories was painfully clear. One day, he summoned the nerve to email her. The message was hesitant, laden with awkward apologies and attempts to reconnect. He offered to be involved in Maya's life, to help out if needed. He stopped short of outright begging, but the undertone was there. Financially strapped and emotionally adrift, he saw a chance to cling to whatever vestiges of family he might salvage. Natalie stared at the email for a long time. Her heart ached for Maya's sake. Every child deserved to know their father's love, if it could be given genuinely. But she also refused to open the door to half-hearted involvement or let Maya be a pawn in Richard's attempts to redeem himself. With careful deliberation, she wrote back, stating that if he wished to be in Maya's life, It would have to be consistent and respectful of her boundaries. He would need to honor the child support arrangement, keep his communication civil and supportive, and earn the trust both she and Maya deserved. To her surprise, Richard responded that he understood. He sounded meek, as though all the bravado had seeped out of him. He asked if he could at least see his daughter. After mulling it over, Natalie agreed to a supervised meeting in a public space, a small park near her apartment. When the day arrived, Richard showed up in plain clothes, carrying a teddy bear. He looked nervous, sweat beading on his forehead despite the crisp weather. Maya, now nearly a year old, gazed at him with innocent curiosity. He tried to engage her, but she clung to Natalie's leg, wary of the stranger before her. Eventually, with some coaxing, Maya took the teddy bear, momentarily distracted by the novelty of it. Richard's face was a tableau of regret and longing. He tried to hold Maya, but she grew fussy, wanting to return to Natalie. He didn't push it. He simply studied her, as though memorizing every detail of the child he had neglected. Natalie watched, torn between relief that he was making an effort and resentment for all he had missed. They parted with no promise of reconciliation, no illusions about their relationship magically healing. Natalie made it clear that if he wanted a role in Maya's life, it had to be on Maya's terms. "Take it one step at a time," she advised gently. Richard nodded, tears pooling in his eyes. "Thank you," he whispered. For what? She wasn't entirely sure. Maybe for allowing him a chance to glimpse the child he'd abandoned. Maybe for embodying forgiveness she hadn't explicitly granted. As Maya grew, so did Ascendant Vision Consulting. In a short span, Natalie expanded her client list to include small businesses and ethically driven startups, not just non-profits. Her ability to empathize with clients and craft powerful campaigns made her a sought-after figure in marketing circles. Financial security followed, and with it came new possibilities. She upgraded her apartment, enrolled Maya in a reputable daycare that doubled as an early learning center, and even managed to set aside savings for the future. Invitations to speak at entrepreneurial summits and women's empowerment conferences poured in. Each time she took the stage, Natalie felt a rush of gratitude and determination. She spoke candidly about her journey, the heartbreak, the pregnancy, the divorce, the drive to succeed. She wanted other women, especially single mothers, to see that adversity could be a springboard, not a cage. One particularly significant moment arrived when she received an invitation to speak at a TEDx event. The theme was resilience, turning pain into power. She labored over her speech for weeks, wanting to strike the right balance between personal story and universal lessons. In front of a packed auditorium, she delivered a talk that began with the night Richard left and ended with a depiction of the thriving life she had built for herself and Maya. The audience erupted into a standing ovation. After the talk, several women approached her, tears in their eyes, thanking her for offering hope and inspiration. The video of her talk went viral, accruing millions of views within days. Requests for interviews and collaborations skyrocketed. The sudden fame felt surreal, but Natalie took it in stride. Her priority remained Maya, protecting her child's well-being amidst the spotlight. She was cautious about how much personal detail she shared publicly, but she never shied away from highlighting the importance of self-reliance, hard work, and emotional healing. Amid her meteoric rise, rumors circulated that Richard's financial situation had spiraled. Debt collectors were on his trail. He was working odd jobs, even rumored to be driving a rideshare to make ends meet. Natalie learned all this through mutual acquaintances and social media chatter, but she chose not to dwell on it. Her focus lay on cherishing the life she had painstakingly rebuilt. One evening, while scrolling through her emails, she paused at a message from an unknown sender. It read simply, "I see how far you've come. I'm sorry. I wish I had been man enough to stand beside you, Richard. She stared at the words, an emotional storm brewing within her. She felt sorrow for him, but no longer heartbreak. She felt compassion, but no inclination to rescue him. She quietly closed her email and went to check on Maya, finding her fast asleep in her bed. Leaning down, Natalie kissed her daughter's forehead, murmuring a silent vow of gratitude that their future was no longer dependent on Richard's choices. The turning point that catapulted Natalie from comfortable success to bona fide millionaire status came through a strategic partnership with a tech startup specializing in educational applications. They needed a marketing genius to guide their product launch. Given Ascendant Vision's track record, Natalie was their first choice. The startup soared, their app revolutionizing how children accessed learning materials online. In exchange for her services, Natalie had negotiated a partial equity stake in idea. She borrowed from reading business case studies during her late-night study sessions. When the startup went public, her shares turned into a life-altering windfall. Almost overnight, her net worth shot past the $1 million mark. She recalled the day she checked her online trading account to see the numbers. A wave of astonishment nearly knocked the wind out of her. She'd officially become a millionaire. The magnitude of it felt both exhilarating and sobering. She remembered nights spent wondering how she'd afford diapers, how she'd put food on the table without Richard's support. Now she had the means to ensure Maya's future and fund causes she cared about. True to her roots, Natalie didn't plunge into extravagance. She maintained a comfortable home with a proper room for Maya and upgraded a few essentials. But the bulk of her newfound wealth went into business expansion and philanthropic endeavors. She set up a scholarship fund for single parents pursuing higher education, naming it the Whitaker Scholarship for Resilience. The press lauded her as a champion of empowerment, a woman who turned adversity into impact. Meanwhile, Richard's life spiraled further. The loss of his job and the burden of insurmountable debt forced him to file for bankruptcy. Isabel was long gone, posting about her new love on social media with no acknowledgement of her past. Richard took odd jobs, eventually settling on a modest apartment in a less affluent part of town. The lavish furniture, the panoramic views, the designer clothes, all were repossessed, sold off or abandoned. One day, as Natalie was driving back from a charity event, she glimpsed a figure that looked unsettlingly like Richard. Standing at a bus stop, she wasn't entirely sure it was him, but the stooped shoulders, the haunted eyes, those details registered in the corner of her vision. She kept driving, heart pounding. In a swirl of conflicting emotions, she knew that if it was indeed Richard, he had sunk to a place she never imagined he would be. It was a stark reminder of how drastically life can shift when fueled by poor choices and selfish motives. She breathed a silent prayer for him, though it was unclear what she prayed for his redemption or simply to let go of whatever lingering ties her heart still held. In that moment, she felt only gratitude for the path she had chosen. She had faced heartbreak, betrayal, and the daunting task of single motherhood. And she had risen above it all, forging a life built on integrity, resilience, and love for her daughter. Indeed, she was a millionaire without him, but more than that, she was whole, confident, and free. Thank you for joining me on this turbulent yet triumphant journey of love, lost, self-discovery, and unwavering determination. Natalie's story stands as a testament to the power of resilience, proving that even the deepest heartbreak can become the cornerstone for a remarkable new life. She refused to let betrayal define her, transforming hardship into an empire of her own, making one that benefits not just herself, but also the world around her.
Abandoned, pregnant, and on the brink of despair, Angela Sinclair's world turned upside down the day her husband, millionaire Richard Sinclair, walked out the door without warning, In a swirl of high-stakes betrayal, hidden agendas, and ruthless legal battles, Angela found the resolve to fight back for herself and the child she carried. What happened next would shake New York's elite to its core, exposing secrets, unveiling alliances, and pitting a scorned wife against her powerful husband and his cunning mistress. Will Angela triumph against overwhelming odds, or will the glitz and glamour of wealth bury her story forever? Stay tuned for a jaw-dropping tale of heartbreak and revenge that you simply can't ignore. Angela Sinclair was born. Angela Moreno, a bright-eyed dreamer from a humble neighborhood in Queens. Her parents, Juan and Maria Moreno, were first-generation immigrants who worked tirelessly to give their children better opportunities. Angela's upbringing was strict, yet loving, instilling in her an unwavering resilience and a conviction that hard work could transform destiny. She possessed an innate optimism that shone through even in the darkest times. Little did she know how much she would rely on that resilience when her life took a devastating turn. Richard Sinclair was the kind of man people read about in Forbes or saw on the covers of business magazines, tall, impeccably dressed with a charismatic smile that could melt ice. He hailed from a wealthy family in Boston, but he made his own millions in real estate development in Manhattan, revitalizing old buildings into modern luxury complexes. A self-styled mogul, Richard had a reputation for flamboyance, throwing lavish parties in penthouse suites and driving the latest sports cars down Fifth Avenue. They met at a charity gala for the American Cancer Society, a prestigious event at the Plaza Hotel. Angela had been there with a close friend, Alyssa Carter, whose father served on the charity's board. Angela's simple black dress stood out among a sea of designer gowns, and Richard, bored by the usual crowd of Manhattan socialites, noticed her sincerity and unassuming beauty. Their conversation flowed with surprising ease. Angela shared how she was earning her master's degree in sociology at NYU, while Richard spoke about his philanthropic endeavors, scholarship funds, and community projects. Or so he claimed. Their courtship was swift. Dinners at Michelin-starred restaurants in Tribeca, invitations to exclusive art openings at MoMA weekend, getaways to the Hamptons. Richard spared no expense to win Angela over, though she was initially dazzled by the lifestyle. She also found much to admire in his ambition. He seemed thoughtful at times, earnest in his desire to make a meaningful impact. Of course, the tabloids loved the pairing. Beauty from Queens dates, real estate prints. Despite the publicity and the whirlwind pace, Angela believed that behind the public glamour, Richard was a caring man with genuine warmth. After a year of dating, Richard proposed in a spectacular gesture on the rooftop of his newest luxury condo project overlooking Central Park, accompanied by a string quartet and a lavish fireworks display. Angela, overwhelmed by emotion and his apparent devotion, said yes. A grand wedding followed at St. Patrick's Cathedral, with a reception at the iconic Rainbow Room. The guest list included CEOs, politicians, and celebrities, including rumored appearances by some high-profile figures, such as design mogul Tommy Hilfiger and real estate tycoon Sam Zell. Angela's parents were both awed and proud, despite feeling like fish out of water in such rarefied company. Looking back, Angela often wondered if the glamour of Richard's world blinded her to ominous warning signs. There were rumors about his past relationships, whispers of infidelity or unscrupulous business dealings. But Angela brushed them aside, insisting she trusted him. Now, as she sat alone in a silent mansion, questioning every decision that led her here, she regretted not paying closer attention. The day her dream turned into a nightmare began with a phone call, one that would lead her to discover a deep betrayal that shook the foundation of her marriage and her faith in Richard. Emily Rutherford née Thompson had always been the type of woman people trusted instinctively. There was a steadiness in her gaze, a calm in her voice, and a warmth in her smile that could melt even the most hardened of hearts. Michael met her during their sophomore year at the University of California, Berkeley. He had been rushing across campus, late for a lecture, when he collided with her outside the economics building. Her books spilled everywhere. He bent down to help her, apologizing profusely. She laughed, brushing a strand of chestnut hair from her face, and said, "Only if you promise to explain Chapter 6 to me afterward." That was the beginning. While Michael studied business and economics, with relentless ambition, Emily majored in communications and minored in sociology. She had a natural talent for understanding people, reading between the lines, knowing when to speak and when silence said more. From the beginning, she supported Michael's dreams with unwavering belief. He talked of building empires, changing the world, and she believed him, not because he promised wealth, but because of the fire in his eyes. When he spoke of the future, in the early years, things weren't glamorous. Their first apartment was a cramped studio, with peeling paint and a leaky faucet. They ate instant noodles more often than not, and Emily picked up extra shifts at the campus bookstore and a local bakery just to help cover Michael's startup expenses. There were nights when Michael stayed up working until dawn, and Emily sat beside him, with flashcards helping him prep for pitches and networking events. When Rutherford Ventures finally gained traction, it felt like the world had cracked open with possibility. The day Michael closed his first multi-million-dollar deal, he came home, lifted Emily off the floor, and spun her around in the living room shouting, "We did it." They married shortly after graduation in an ethereal ceremony at a vineyard in Napa Valley. The wedding was everything they'd dreamed of. Ivory table linens, twinkling fairy lights strung across rows of grapevines, laughter echoing beneath the golden California sun. Michael vowed to protect her, to build a life worthy of her sacrifice and loyalty. Emily vowed to never let success change the essence of who they were together. Years passed, and their lives transformed dramatically. Emily became the quiet force behind Michael's empire. She didn't attend board meetings or appear in business magazines, but she hosted elegant dinner parties, remembered every investor's spouse's name, and charmed even the most stoic clients. Behind the scenes, she was Michael's mirror, reflecting his best intentions and gently curbing his worst impulses. They moved into a mansion in Pacific Heights, 4 stories of glass, steel, and modern opulence. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the bay, and the master suite had a fireplace balcony and walk-in closet the size of their old apartment. A vacation home in Lake Tahoe followed. Then came the yacht, the private chef, and designer wardrobes. Emily smiled through it all, though sometimes she missed the days when Michael would fall asleep, mid-sentence beside her. Not because of exhaustion, but because he simply wanted to stay close. She never complained about the solitude that crept in slowly over the years. Michael's empire demanded time, and she understood. He traveled often. New York, London, Singapore. Emily filled her days with charity work, home design projects, and mentoring younger women from underprivileged communities, helping them navigate careers in corporate communications. She had everything society claimed should make a woman happy. Yet sometimes she caught herself staring out the window, too long wondering when exactly the laughter had faded from their home. She noticed the changes in Michael gradually. It began with him staying later at the office, taking more calls during dinner, and responding to texts with vague, distracted nods. His laughter became rarer, and when he smiled, it no longer reached his eyes. He was becoming a man she barely recognized, driven restless and increasingly secretive. Emily wasn't naive. She'd seen how men in power behaved. Several of Michael's peers had traded their wives for younger models, claiming they'd simply grown apart. Emily always hated that phrase. It felt like an excuse for people too cowardly to fight for what they'd built. She'd promised herself they would be different. She and Michael had been through too much, had built too much to ever throw it away for novelty. But something was wrong. He no longer asked about her day. He barely touched her at night. There were nights she found herself alone in their vast bed, wondering if she had become invisible. She tried to ignore the flickers of doubt. She told herself he was stressed, that the pressures of leading a multi-billion-dollar firm weighed on him, that this was just a phase. Then came the night she found him in the guest bedroom at 2 a.m., whispering into his phone. When she stepped into the doorway, he jumped. His explanation was thin. Something about a call with Tokyo. Emily didn't question him outright. She simply watched the way his fingers tightened around the phone and the way his eyes refused to meet hers. Her heart began to fracture. Still she tried. She cooked his favorite meals, suggested weekend getaways, left notes in his suitcase when he traveled, but his responses were lukewarm. He was polite, he thanked her, but she could feel the growing chasm between them, vast and silent. She confided in Lucy Marshall, her best friend since college. Lucy had seen too many of their friends' marriages implode and didn't mince words. "He's cheating," Lucy said, flatly swirling her wine. "I've seen this play before." Emily shook her head. "No, Michael wouldn't." "Wouldn't what?" "Be human. Be tempted." Lucy challenged. "You've been loyal, Emily, but loyalty doesn't guarantee reciprocity. You need to protect yourself." Emily wanted to believe otherwise. She clung to the memories of the boy who carried her books, who cried with joy when they bought their first house, who once told her, "I don't care about the money. I care about building a life with you." But the man in their bed now no longer whispered those things. Late one night, Emily stood on the balcony of their master suite, wrapped in a cashmere robe, the cold biting at her skin. Below, the city sparkled with life. Cars, lights, laughter. Her eyes stung with tears she didn't want to shed. She wasn't crying just for Michael. She was mourning the version of herself who had believed love was enough. In her heart, Emily knew a storm was coming. She didn't know how or when it would strike, but she sensed it with a clarity that cut through the fog of her denial. The loyal wife had stood by quietly for too long. Now she would have to decide who she was without him, and whether she had the strength to face the truth when it finally revealed itself. The day Angela's suspicions transformed into cold, hard truth started like any other. She woke up early, prepared breakfast. French toast, fresh strawberries and coffee, exactly the way Richard liked it. But he barely touched his plate before rushing out, muttering something about an important business meeting downtown. She stood on the balcony overlooking the bustle of Fifth Avenue, trying to ignore the ominous feeling in her gut. Late that afternoon, Angela was preparing for a charity auction they were scheduled to attend when a courier arrived at the penthouse. He handed her a small, discreetly wrapped envelope, assuming it was another event invitation. Angela opened it without much thought. Inside, she found photographs grainy, yet explicit enough to see Richard intimately embracing a woman with dark hair and a striking figure. Her hands shook as she flipped through more photos that showcased the two leaving a hotel holding hands and even sharing a passionate kiss by a private elevator. A note accompanied the pictures. "Your husband is cheating on you." He's been doing it for months. Ask him about the Ormond Hotel. There was no signature. The letters were typed, giving no clue about who sent them. Angela's mind reeled. Her heart pounding in her chest. She felt betrayed, humiliated, and ashamed that someone else knew about this before she did, or at least had the audacity to present it to her like a sinister gift. She clutched the envelope, waiting in the living room, until dusk. Richard finally returned, distractedly loosening his tie and glancing at the mail on the table. When she confronted him with the photos, his face went pale, then quickly hardened. He snatched them from her hand, feigning outrage. "Where did you get these? They're fake. Someone is trying to blackmail me." His protestations sounded rehearsed. Angela demanded to know who the woman was. At first, he tried to deny everything, claiming the pictures were altered. Angela's tears and fury mounted. "Look me in the eyes and tell me you haven't been sleeping with her," she demanded, voice trembling. She showed him the hotel receipt from Ormond. Hotel that had accidentally slipped out from one of the pictures. His name, her name, one suite paid in full, with his credit card. Hard to deny. In a sudden switch, Richard dropped his act. He hurled the photos on the table. "Fine, her name is Christina Baxter." He spat. "She's someone I've been seeing, but it's not what you think." Angela's world shattered. Every detail of her life with Richard, every memory, every promise felt like a cruel farce. She could barely breathe through the heartbreak. "How could you do this? How could you lie to me?" she cried. Richard tried to close the distance between them, but she recoiled. "Angela, listen, I can explain." "It's complicated. I never intended for it to get this far." She slapped him. The sound echoed in the cavernous penthouse. "Get out," she commanded, tears streaming down her cheeks. She insisted he leave before she completely lost whatever composure remained. Richard stormed out, leaving Angela alone with only the cold comfort of her shattered reality. Little did he know that this moment, his final exit that evening, would be the first step in Angela's journey to take him down in a way he never anticipated. The following weeks were a haze of heartbreak and confusion. Angela avoided the tabloids, but she could not escape the persistent paparazzi outside her building, nor the swirl of rumors among Manhattan's elite. Friends from high society gatherings offered her half-hearted sympathies, thinly veiled gossip sessions disguised as concern. Angela realized how isolated she'd become in this new life. How few genuine friends she had. Alyssa Carter, her longtime confidant, remained her rock, but Alyssa was frequently out of town. Angela's parents, Maria and Juan, were worried sick. They wanted her to come home, but she resisted clinging to some faint hope of salvaging her marriage. During this tumultuous period, Angela discovered she was pregnant. The realization came one morning when she felt dizzy, nearly fainting in the bathroom. A slew of symptoms: nausea, extreme fatigue. Emotional swings led her to take a test. When the result read positive, a mix of fear and excitement warred within her. After the initial shock, she felt an unexpected surge of love for the life growing inside her. This baby was her flesh and blood, entirely innocent, and she vowed to protect it at all costs. Yet the pregnancy weighed on her heart with new anxieties. Richard was the father. How would he react? Would he dismiss the pregnancy as a trap, an inconvenience? Or in some faint corner of her imagination, did she still hope it might bring him back? The swirl of questions was overwhelming. She resolved to inform Richard, hoping against all logic that it might shift his perspective. When Angela finally gathered the courage to call, the line went to voicemail. Several attempts later, she received a curt text. "I'm in a meeting. We'll talk when I'm free." Days passed without a word. Each night she tossed and turned, feeling the gravity of her predicament. She was pregnant alone and losing faith in everything that once anchored her. In desperation, Angela reached out to Richard's mother, Evelyn Sinclair. Evelyn was a formidable woman, silver-haired, impeccably dressed, and fiercely protective of the Sinclair name. Perhaps she could reason with her son. When Angela finally got through, Evelyn maintained a frosty politeness. "I'm sorry to hear about this situation, Angela. However, Richard is a grown man. I'm sure he'll do the right thing." The words rang hollow. Days turned into weeks. Angela found herself pacing the penthouse, which felt eerily silent. The staff had mostly left, some dismissed by Richard, others resigned out of uncertainty about the household's future. Bills still arrived, but she had limited access to the finances. Much of the money was tied up in trusts or business accounts under Richard's name. She had credit cards, but Richard had cut them off. Alone, pregnant, and financially cornered, Angela felt abandoned. A phone call from an old friend provided a flicker of hope. Marcus Whitmore, a lawyer she'd met during a pro bono project at NYU, offered his help. When she explained her predicament, Marcus didn't hesitate. "Angela, you have rights. He can't just leave you without support." For the first time in weeks, she sensed a glimmer of empowerment. Perhaps with Marcus's guidance, she could confront Richard properly, not just for herself, but for the child she carried. Christina Baxter was not new to the game of social climbing. She came from a working-class neighborhood in Queens, not far from Angela's old stomping grounds, though their paths had never crossed. By her early 20s, Christina had reinvented herself, changing her accent, grooming her appearance, and learning the ins and outs of Manhattan's elite circles. She started as a club promoter, then became the face of upscale events, ingratiating herself with wealthy men. Over time, she learned the power of seduction, charm, and strategic networking. Richard first encountered Christina at a charity runway show, one of those extravagant events he attended to maintain a philanthropic facade. Christina was modeling a designer's new line and managed to catch Richard's eye. Later that night, she boldly approached him, sliding a cocktail napkin across the bar with her phone number scrawled in smooth cursive. From that moment, their dalliance began. Christina was meticulous in her approach. She knew Richard was married, but that only fueled her ambition. When she discovered the extent of his fortune, she engineered ways to appear indispensable. She would accidentally show up at the same galas, feigning surprise. She did research on his business interests, impressing him with her feigned knowledge of real estate development. Soon she became his confidant, offering emotional support whenever he complained about stress, often painting Angela as a wife who didn't understand his business demands. The affair escalated quickly, fueled by Richard's arrogance and Christina's calculated pursuit. They met in luxury hotels, ate at secluded Michelin-starred restaurants in Greenwich Village, and even jetted off to Miami under the guise of business trips. Christina took notes every step of the way. She saved receipts, recorded voice notes, and photographed moments that proved their involvement. Evidence she stored in a secure cloud folder. In her mind, if Richard ever tried to cast her aside, she would have ammunition to protect her newfound lifestyle. When Angela discovered the affair, Christina knew it was only a matter of time before the situation blew up. While Richard scrambled to maintain damage control, Christina began planting seeds of her own narrative. She confided in a few strategic friends, some of them reality TV hopefuls, others social media influencers, drop-feeding them tidbits about how Richard had led her on and promised to leave his wife. She played the role of the victim, ensuring that if the story went public, it wouldn't paint her as a mere homewrecker, but as someone misled by a powerful man. Behind the scenes, Christina had ambitions that stretched beyond being an affair partner. She wanted financial security, possibly a ring on her finger, or at least a significant settlement. She saw Angela as an obstacle, someone whose presence in Richard's life prevented him from fully giving in to Christina's demands. The pregnancy, if Christina knew about it, would be an even bigger threat to her plans. While Angela was struggling with heartbreak and an uncertain future, Christina was methodically tightening her grip on Richard, playing to his vanity and fear. If he wanted to keep her from spilling secrets, he would need to keep her satisfied. Little did Christina realize Angela was no longer the naive wife she once was. A collision course was set, and both women were determined not to be the one left empty-handed. Confiding in lawyer Marcus Whitmore was Angela's first smart move. Marcus had a sharp legal mind and an empathetic streak that set him apart from the high-powered, cutthroat attorneys of Richard's world. He carefully reviewed Angela's marriage documents, including the prenuptial agreement. The prenup had been Richard's idea, orchestrated by his family's legal team before the wedding. At the time, Angela had felt she had nothing to hide or fear. She trusted Richard. Now that same document loomed as a potential barrier to her financial security and her unborn child's well-being. Yet Marcus found some interesting angles. For one, Angela had significantly compromised her own education and career opportunities at Richard's request. This factor, coupled with the pregnancy, could be powerful in challenging parts of the prenup, especially under New York state law. Marcus explained, judges aren't fond of punishing a spouse who's been sidelined from their own prospects, especially when a child is involved. With Marcus's counsel, Angela began meticulously documenting everything. She tracked expenses she could no longer pay, due to Richard freezing their joint accounts, recorded the times he ignored her calls about the pregnancy, and even saved text messages where he made veiled threats. Marcus assured her these details would be invaluable should they need to litigate. Aside from legal help, Angela found unexpected support from her NYU professors. When she emailed her old academic advisor, Dr. Rebecca Nguyen, about her situation, Dr. Nguyen offered words of encouragement and an open door to return to the program whenever she could. While it didn't solve her immediate crisis, the reassurance reminded Angela she had her own life path, one that didn't solely revolve around Richard's whims. Her parents, Juan and Maria, remained her emotional anchors. Though they lived in a modest row home in Queens, far from the marble floors of the Sinclair penthouse, their home was a sanctuary of warmth and unconditional love. Angela would drop by, and Maria would cook her comforting meals while gently rubbing her back, telling her in Spanish, "Mija, you will find your strength." Juan, a proud man who rarely showed vulnerability, quietly handed her a small envelope of his own savings, insisting she take care of herself and the baby. Angela, moved to tears, declined, but her father pressed it into her hands, unwavering in his insistence. Angela also had her friend, Alyssa Carter, who had connections in philanthropic circles. Though Alyssa was often traveling, she pulled strings to get Angela invited to exclusive seminars and workshops on female entrepreneurship. Perhaps ironically, these events were typically attended by women seeking investments from the likes of Richard Sinclair, but Angela saw them as opportunities to build her own network. She met potential mentors, philanthropic leaders like Diana Weinstein, who ran a non-profit assisting women in crisis situations. Even a quick chat here or there opened the possibility of forging new alliances outside of her crumbling marriage. The more Angela gathered support, the clearer her mission became. She would not crumble under Richard's betrayal. Instead, She would secure her future, and that of her babies, with Marcus preparing the groundwork and a renewed sense of purpose. Angela took the first confident steps toward a battle she never dreamed she'd have to fight. While Angela quietly strategized, Richard sank deeper into a maze of deception. Eager to preserve his public image, he worked overtime in the media to paint himself as a misunderstood husband in a complicated marriage. Public relations teams churned out press releases about his commitment to philanthropy and ongoing efforts to support charities. He staged photo ops at children's hospitals and homeless shelters, trying to overshadow the gossip swirling about him and Christina behind the scenes. However, Richard was becoming unhinged. The real estate market was shifting. A few of his luxury developments, stalled financing got tighter, and new competition emerged in prime Manhattan locations. Investors demanded transparency, and some started raising eyebrows about his personal controversies. Questions rose. Was he reliable? Was his marriage scandal hinting at deeper professional instability? Richard tried to appease Christina to keep her from stirring more drama. He rented a penthouse suite at the prestigious Ventara Towers, discreetly putting it in her name. He spoiled her with expensive jewelry from Cartier, hoping the gifts would buy her silence and loyalty. Christina, sensing an opportunity, pushed for more. She wanted to be seen as an integral part of his life, not just a secret fling. She pressed him to consider divorcing Angela more aggressively, or at least making a public statement about their separation. Meanwhile, Richard dodged Angela's attempts to discuss the pregnancy. On a rare phone call he answered, he dismissed her news. "I can't handle this right now," he said tersely. "We'll talk when things settle." Angela's repeated pleas for financial assistance went ignored. He assumed she was too timid to act without his goodwill, underestimating both her resolve and Marcus's legal prowess. At the same time, Richard employed his mother's family lawyer, a formidable figure named Malcolm Birnbaum, to draft a restrictive postnup agreement. The document intended to limit Angela's claims in the event of a divorce, especially any spousal support beyond a minimal monthly allowance. Richard's plan was simple corner. Angela financially wearing her down until she agreed to terms favorable to him. He never once considered that Angela would stand her ground, let alone gather the means to fight back on equal footing. In an increasingly paranoid state, Richard also leaned on private investigators to watch Angela. He wanted to ensure she wasn't meeting with lawyers or journalists who could further tarnish his name. The investigation revealed Angela's frequent visits to a legal office in Midtown alarmed. Richard confronted her at their penthouse one evening, banging on the door like a man possessed. Angela opened it cautiously. The confrontation that followed was heated. "You dare involve attorneys behind my back," he snarled. Angela, trembling but steadfast, held her ground. "I gave you every opportunity to do the right thing, Richard. You left me no choice." He stormed off, threatening to drag her through a public fight. She couldn't win. "I'll bury you and your so-called lawyer," he spat. But the look in Angela's eyes told him something had changed. She wasn't the timid housewife anymore. A reckoning was coming, and for once, Richard felt a flicker of apprehension he couldn't entirely dismiss. Angela's life was a whirlwind of doctor's appointments and legal consultations. Her OB/GYN doctor, Catherine Lee, confirmed that despite the stress, her pregnancy was progressing normally. Minimize anxiety. Dr. Lee advised, gently knowing full well how impossible that seemed, given Angela's marital crisis. Each ultrasound became a refuge of joy, a reminder that something precious was waiting at the end of this painful journey. One particularly rainy afternoon, Angela received a phone call from a blocked number. She hesitated, but answered. A woman's voice whispered urgently, "We have a common enemy, Richard Sinclair. Meet me at Café Lumière tomorrow at noon." Before Angela could ask a single question, the line went dead. Curiosity battled caution, but Angela decided to go. The next day, she stepped into the cozy cafe and scanned the room. In a corner booth sat a woman in dark sunglasses, sipping tea. She beckoned Angela over. Removing the glasses, the woman introduced herself as Ava Heaton, a former employee of one of Richard's real estate holding companies. Ava claimed she had proof of financial misdeeds, embezzlement, fraudulent contracts, and inflated valuations that could bring Richard's empire down. She said she was fired unjustly, shorted on severance, and threatened with legal action if she went public. Angela listened, her heart pounding. Ava pushed a folder across the table. Inside were spreadsheets, email, correspondence, and financial statements showing suspicious transactions. "I'm risking a lot by giving you this," Ava confessed. "But I can't let him ruin any more lives." Though overwhelmed, Angela recognized the power of this information. If Richard was committing fraud, it could compromise any settlement Angela was entitled to. Moreover, it could jeopardize the legacy and trust funds for her baby. But stepping into this territory was dangerous. She asked Ava why she didn't go to the authorities directly. "Richard's lawyers would bury me," Ava explained, eyes glinting with anger. "They'd drag my name through the mud, claim I stole data. I need someone with a legitimate reason to use this evidence, someone who won't be easily dismissed. That's you." Angela felt a mixture of dread and determination. This was bigger than just spousal support or child custody. If what Ava revealed was true, it could land Richard in prison or at least force him into a corner where he'd have to negotiate. Angela reached for her phone, snapping photos of each document, her hands shaking. She thanked Ava and promised to keep her identity confidential for now. That night, Angela met with Marcus and laid out the folder. As he pored over the documents, his professional composure cracked into surprise. "This is damning. If it holds up, Richard is in serious trouble. But be prepared for backlash. He'll fight tooth and nail to protect himself." For Angela, the evidence represented a turning point. No longer was she just a forsaken wife seeking justice. Now she had leverage, real leverage, to hold Richard accountable for every wrongdoing, with her unborn child's future at stake. Angela steeled herself. She would not back down no matter what storm Richard tried to unleash. The decision to proceed with legal action solidified when Angela realized Richard had stopped paying the penthouse mortgage and utilities. She received eviction notices and panicked phone calls from property managers. With nowhere else to turn, she packed her belongings and moved in with her parents, determined to spare herself the humiliation of being thrown onto the street. Marcus wasted no time filing a lawsuit, seeking both divorce and substantial alimony, child support, and damages for emotional distress. He also initiated a separate investigation into Richard's business dealings, forwarding some of Ava Heaton's documents to trusted financial analysts who could corroborate their authenticity. While criminal charges were not within Angela's direct power to file the evidence, could be turned over to the district attorney if needed. Word spread fast in Manhattan's social and legal circles. Suddenly, Angela was no longer the quiet, jilted spouse. She was a formidable adversary, armed with claims that threatened Richard's carefully curated image. Gossip columns churned out stories speculating about Richard's alleged embezzlement, while social media was abuzz with commentary on the sensational case. In the midst of the frenzy, Christina Baxter tried to salvage her own position. She clung to Richard, pushing for public reassurance of their relationship, or at least a financial arrangement that ensured her future. But Richard was under immense pressure from multiple fronts: investors, lawyers, the press. He no longer had the bandwidth to placate Christina, which made her increasingly restless. She started dropping hints in online fashion forums and gossip sites, implying she had her own trove of damaging information if she wasn't treated fairly. Still, she stopped short of betraying Richard, outright calculating that her best move was to see how the court drama played out. Angela's pregnancy advanced. She was in her second trimester, beginning to show. Despite the chaos, she discovered a surprising inner peace whenever she felt the baby flutter. Her mother's home became a refuge. She helped Maria cook meals, watch telenovelas in the evenings, and occasionally tried to distract herself with crocheting baby blankets. During these quieter moments, a growing determination fueled her. She wasn't just fighting for herself, she was fighting for her child's right to a secure future. Marcus scheduled a meeting with Richard's legal team to discuss the possibility of an out-of-court settlement. The day of the meeting, Angela and Marcus walked into a high-rise conference room overlooking Central Park. Richard, flanked by Malcolm Birnbaum and 2 junior associates, barely looked at Angela. His face was taut, jaw clenched. The tension in the room was palpable. Birnbaum opened with a dismissive tone, offering a paltry settlement. "We believe Mrs. Sinclair is entitled to a modest monthly allowance, given the short duration of the marriage and the prenuptial agreement." Angela felt her blood boil. Marcus smiled thinly and slid copies of key financial records across the sleek table. "We also have reason to believe that Mr. Sinclair engaged in fraudulent activities," Marcus said, his voice measured. "This evidence can be introduced in court if no fair agreement is reached." Richard's eyes flashed with alarm. He shot a glare at Angela. The meeting ended in a stalemate, but Angela could see the cracks. For the first time, Richard appeared genuinely uneasy. The road to court was set, and both sides were gearing up for a showdown with massive consequences. The trial commenced on a crisp morning at the New York Supreme Court. A throng of reporters and curious onlookers gathered outside cameras, flashing as Angela, with her baby bump visible beneath a tailored maternity dress, made her way through the crowd. Richard arrived separately, a scowl plastered on his face. His expensive suit and aloof demeanor only reinforced the distance between them. Inside the wood-paneled courtroom, Judge Catherine Friedman presided. An experienced jurist known for her no-nonsense approach, Friedman was unimpressed by high-profile theatrics. She immediately laid ground rules cautioning both parties that outbursts and media manipulation would be met with stern consequences. Marcus opened Angela's case with a measured emotional appeal. He described her sacrifices for the marriage, leaving her master's program, giving up her own aspirations, and the emotional toll inflicted by Richard's affair and subsequent abandonment. Evidence of Richard's refusal to acknowledge the pregnancy or provide support was laid out, including text messages, phone call logs, and anecdotal testimony from Angela's mother, Maria, who described Angela's distress in heartbreaking detail. Richard's legal team countered with a narrative portraying Angela as an opportunist. They argued that she benefited from the lavish lifestyle and was now trying to cash in further. Malcolm Birnbaum insisted that any wrongdoing on Richard's part was a personal failing, separate from his obligations under the prenuptial agreement, which Angela had signed willingly. Then came the curveball financial records Marcus presented, spreadsheets detailing suspicious wire transfers and shell companies tied to Richard's developments. One of the star witnesses was Ava Heaton, who testified about her experiences within Richard's company, how she'd been asked to falsify documents, and then fired when she refused. She recounted internal emails from Richard referencing creative accounting, which was code for illegal funneling of funds. The gallery buzzed with surprise. On cross-examination, Birnbaum tried to discredit Ava, painting her as a disgruntled ex-employee. But Ava held her composure, referencing Times dates and direct quotes. Judge Friedman allowed the evidence into the record, though she made no immediate ruling on the validity of the allegations, stating she would consider them in conjunction with further expert testimony. As the day progressed, Christina Baxter was called to the stand by Angela's team, an unexpected twist that sent murmurs through the courtroom. She arrived wearing designer attire, looking more like she was attending a fashion premiere than a legal proceeding. Her testimony was guarded, but under oath she admitted to the affair and revealed that Richard had promised her financial security if she kept their relationship discreet. While she tried to downplay her motivations, cross-examination painted her as complicit in hiding funds. She clammed up, refusing to provide further detail about offshore accounts or hush money she may have received, claiming she didn't recall. The tension in the courtroom peaked when Richard took the stand. Barely meeting Angela's gaze, he tried to justify his actions, chalking up the affair to a moment of weakness. He disparaged the financial allegations as a smear campaign, accusing Angela of colluding with a bitter ex-employee, but his bravado cracked under Marcus's pointed questions and the mountain of documented evidence. By the end of the first week, the public narrative shifted dramatically. The once untouchable real estate mogul was no longer seen as a misunderstood husband. Evidence of corporate malfeasance, combined with his callous treatment of a pregnant wife, painted a far darker picture. The stage was set for a bombshell verdict, one that could change Angela's life forever. Tension soared as the trial reached its midpoint. Judge Friedman allowed both parties to present additional witnesses and finalize depositions. Courtroom gossip suggested Richard was scrambling to contain new revelations, including potential witness statements from disgruntled investors who had lost money in his stalled developments. Moreover, it became apparent that the district attorney's office was paying close attention to the proceedings, especially the financial data exposed by Angela's team. The biggest twist came when an anonymous tip was delivered to Marcus's office containing a flash drive with more damning correspondence between Richard and key executives in his organization. The emails explicitly discussed forging contractual documents and concealing losses from shareholders. The tipster turned out to be none other than one of Richard's junior associates, who had grown uneasy with the lies and found a way to leak the files. When Marcus submitted the drive as evidence, Birnbaum exploded in protest, claiming it was unverified and illegally obtained. Judge Friedman allowed a forensic review, and the digital fingerprints confirmed the emails were authentic. During a recess, Richard approached Angela in the corridor, a desperation in his eyes she had never seen before. "Angela," he began quietly, "let's talk. We can settle this without dragging each other through more mud." He proposed a substantial payout, enough for Angela to live comfortably and raise their child on the condition that she withdraw the lawsuit and make no further mention of criminal allegations. For a brief second, Angela felt the old pang of love for the man she had once married, but she remembered the months of abandonment, the cruelty and the unborn child he had so callously ignored. Too late, she replied, her voice resolute. "I trusted you once. That's never happening again." She turned away, leaving Richard to seethe in silent frustration. Christina Baxter's actions also threw a wrench into the case. Afraid of becoming a scapegoat, she privately reached out to Marcus, offering more incriminating information in exchange for immunity from any potential legal fallout. Through this, Angela's team uncovered that Christina had personally facilitated the creation of shell companies at Richard's behest, receiving a sizable commission. The mistress, who once reveled in her victory over Angela, was now an inadvertent ally. Christina's defection triggered chaos in Richard's camp, undermining his credibility even further. As proceedings neared conclusion, the media labeled the case as the Sinclair scandal. Major outlets like the New York Times and CNN covered the trial, dissecting every revelation. Online people rallied behind Angela as a symbol of resilience against privileged men who thought they were above the law. In a final act of cunning, Birnbaum tried to claim Angela was meddling with crucial evidence, an accusation that fell apart under scrutiny. Judge Friedman dismissed the motion, reiterating that the financial records and witness testimonies were sufficiently vetted. Sensing the tide of the trial, Birnbaum filed motions to postpone hearings, hoping to buy time. But Friedman was firm, pressing both sides to expedite. Ultimately, it became clear that Richard was cornered. The illusions he had crafted were shattered, replaced by an avalanche of facts and testimonies pointing toward his guilt both in his marriage and his business dealings. His attempts to shift blame onto Angela or Christina simply didn't resonate. With the final hearing looming, all that remained was the judge's decision, a verdict that would either vindicate Angela's fight for justice or send her back to the margins of a broken dream. The final day of the trial was a spectacle. Every seat in the courtroom was filled, and the overflow crowd congregated in the hall, straining to catch fragments of the proceedings. Angela arrived early, feeling her baby move gently in her womb, a reassuring reminder of why she fought so hard. Richard walked in, pale, his confident stride reduced to a stiff shuffle. Judge Friedman began by addressing the divorce and financial settlement. She stated plainly that Richard, by ignoring his pregnant wife and cutting off financial resources, had violated the spirit of support inherent in marriage. The judge invalidated key sections of the prenuptial agreement, citing the grossly imbalanced circumstances under which Angela was left. The courtroom sat in silence as Friedman awarded Angela a substantial monthly spousal support and child support package. Additionally, Friedman granted Angela a sizable portion of Richard's assets, ensuring not only the baby's welfare, but also Angela's long-term stability. Yet the drama didn't end there. Friedman also addressed the allegations of financial malfeasance. While the divorce court couldn't hand down criminal penalties, the judge noted that enough evidence had surfaced to warrant further investigation by prosecutors. She strongly recommended the case be forwarded to the district attorney's office, stating, "The court cannot ignore evidence of widespread fraud. This matter demands a thorough legal review by the appropriate authorities." A hush fell over the room. Angela glanced at Marcus, relief flooding her. They had done it. They hadn't just secured financial justice. They had exposed a web of deceit that could no longer be hidden. Richard's expression was a mix of disbelief and impotent rage. Christina, seated behind Richard's legal team, looked visibly shaken. Her dreams of living as a millionaire's companion were crumbling before her eyes. As Friedman finished reading her judgment, gavel slamming on the wooden desk, the flurry of reporters rose to unleash questions. Angela's name rang out in a cacophony of voices, but she kept her head high, guided by Marcus and Alyssa as they navigated the camera-laden exit. Outside, Angela hesitated briefly, turning to face the crowd. She took a breath, then calmly stated, "I hope my story helps others understand. You can stand up for yourself, no matter how powerful the opposition seems." Then she continued on her way, ignoring the further torrent of inquiries. The next few weeks were a blur. Angela moved into a modest but comfortable apartment on the Upper West Side, arranged through the settlement's immediate disbursement. She resumed her studies at NYU, determined to complete her master's degree before the baby arrived. Meanwhile, Richard's empire began to collapse under the weight of investor lawsuits and the looming criminal investigation. Christina Baxter attempted to vanish from the public eye, but rumors suggested she was also under scrutiny for her involvement. Through it all, Angela felt a renewed sense of purpose. She woke each morning aware of her growing belly. Her future brightened by the knowledge that she had not only survived, but overcome betrayal of the highest order. In time, she believed she would find closure. For now, she savored the sweet taste of victory, buoyed by the promise she made to protect her child at all costs. In the months that followed the trial, Angela's life slowly fell into a new, more peaceful rhythm. The tabloids eventually found other scandals to chase, and Angela was able to reclaim a measure of anonymity. She dedicated herself to finishing her sociology degree, diving into research projects centered on family law and socio-economic disparities, a subject now deeply personal to her. She wrote papers on how legal systems often fail marginalized spouses when wealthy partners exploit prenuptial agreements. Professors praised her for turning her life experience into academic insight that could help others. Her pregnancy progressed, and with each milestone, hearing the baby's heartbeat, the first flutter of a kick, Angela felt a profound sense of gratitude. Her mother accompanied her to Lamar's classes, and her father, while initially awkward about the idea of childbirth, proudly showed off ultrasound photos to his co-workers at the construction site. It became a family affair, grounded in warmth and genuine love. Meanwhile, Richard's fall from grace was both swift and public. Investigations led to criminal charges for fraud and embezzlement, and multiple lawsuits hammered the once glamorous Sinclair real estate empire. Despite attempts to negotiate plea deals, the evidence was simply too damning. Christina Baxter was subpoenaed, and the last Angela heard, Christina had turned state's witness in exchange for leniency. The woman who had once lauded her affair over Angela now sang a different tune in front of prosecutors. Periodically, Angela wondered if Richard felt remorse, not just for betraying her, but for risking the stability of their unborn child. His minimal attempts at contact came through stiff legal channels, yet Angela refused to let bitterness shape her future. With the help of therapy, she learned to separate the heartbreak from her sense of self-worth. She resolved that her child would know they were conceived in love. Whatever chaos followed was on Richard, not on them. Finally, on a bright, brisk morning in late spring, Angela gave birth to a baby boy. Mateo Sinclair, Moreno, Marcus, and Alyssa visited the hospital, bearing gifts and wide smiles. Angela's parents wept joyfully, marveling at their tiny grandson. The moment Angela held Mateo, she felt an indescribable wave of fulfillment. In that instant, every hardship, every tear shed in her darkest hours, felt like stepping stones leading to this precious miracle. A few weeks later, comfortably settled back in her apartment, Angela sat in a rocking chair with Mateo asleep in her arms. She gazed out the window at the Manhattan skyline. The city she once found intimidating was now just a place like any other, a tapestry of triumph and tragedy. She felt neither hatred nor regret, only a quiet sense of accomplishment. She had faced betrayal, humiliation, and a daunting legal battle. In the end, she emerged stronger, forging a new path for herself and her son. As she softly hummed a lullaby, Angela realized that life's storms often pave the way for new beginnings. She had proven to herself and to the world that even a millionaire's abandoned wife could rise from the ashes stronger, wiser, and ready to embrace a brighter tomorrow. Thank you for joining us on this tumultuous journey through heartbreak, scandal, and ultimate triumph. Angela Sinclair's determination and courage remind us that no matter how powerful the opposition, justice can prevail when we fight for our rights and refuse to be silenced. If you found yourself moved by Angela's story, her grit in the face of betrayal, her relentless pursuit of truth, and her unwavering love for her unborn child, then please show your support. Call to action. Let us know you appreciate compelling stories of resilience and justice. Share, spread Angela's remarkable journey to inspire those who may be facing their own battles. Subscribe, stay tuned for more dramatic, real-life inspired stories that showcase the human spirit's ability to overcome even the darkest obstacles. Hit the notification bell and be the first to witness more stories of courage and hope.